Well, hey there and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're looking at yet another one of your required Supreme Court cases for the AP government curriculum, namely Muller v. Oregon. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, then let's get to it. So before we jump into the case itself, let's begin with the facts of the case. In 1903, the state of Oregon passed a law that set maximum hours for women to work in certain types of establishments. Now, Oregon wasn't alone in doing this. Muller, the woman who was fined, argued that the Oregon law infringed upon her right to earn a living and that the state had no business restricting her hours just because she is a woman. First of all, this case matters because it dramatically expanded the realm of state power. They argued that the state had the right to make laws that treated people differently based on their physical differences and also based on their role in reproduction. When this case was decided in 1908, it was seen as a major victory for women's rights activists. Many feminists of the time argued that limiting women's working hours would allow them to take better care of their families and would keep women out of dangerous working environments. Additionally, this law, along with others like it, allowed women to spend more time in the political sphere and become more active in their communities. However, later, as second-wave feminists began examining laws like these, they realized that laws like the one in Oregon were actually a way of keeping women in the domestic sphere and reinforcing harmful stereotypes about women. Limiting women's ability to work meant that they were less economically autonomous and therefore more dependent on men, and the argument that women needed special protection because of their reproductive capabilities was simply a way to limit women's opportunities and keep them from entering traditionally male-dominated fields. Now, this was very different from previous arguments about states' rights. If you want even more help, then click right over here and grab a view packet, which is going to help you get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. I've got videos on all the other required Supreme Court cases right here. So click away if that's something that you're into. Subscribe if you want me to keep making these videos and I shall surely oblige. I'm out. Previously, states had argued that they could regulate the activities of certain groups differently based on their immutable characteristics, meaning characteristics that could not be changed. For example, states had previously argued that they could pass laws that were racially discriminatory because race is immutable. But here, the state of Oregon was arguing that women needed special protection because of their capacity to bear children. Prior to this case, most of the laws that states had passed regarding working conditions were struck down by the Supreme Court because they violated the idea of laissez-faire economics. In other words, the court generally believed that government should not interfere with the free market. However, in this case, they gave states the authority to regulate working conditions in order to protect the health and safety of workers. And after this case, states began passing all kinds of labor laws regulating things like minimum wage, maximum hours, and even child labor. The state of Oregon, though, argued that the law did not violate the Constitution because women are different from men physically, and because women bear children, they are more fragile and susceptible to physical ailments. Therefore, it was the state's job to protect women from themselves, to protect them from working too hard, and to protect future generations of children by ensuring that their mothers were not physically overworked. Well, this case revolved around the 14th Amendment and specifically the Equal Protection Clause. And in answering that question, the court ruled in favor of the state of Oregon. And in his written opinion, Justice John Marshall Hall said this: "To a certain extent, therefore, the lawmaking and the law enforcing power of the state is superior to the will of the individual citizen. It is superior for the protection of the state as well as of the citizens. The state has a real and vital interest in the health, the morals, and the welfare of its women citizens. This interest does not yield to the mere preference or even to the will of the individual woman herself." Remember that the Equal Protection Clause says that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, prior to this case, the general consensus among the court and among lawmakers was that the Equal Protection Clause only applied to the denial of rights based on race. However, the argument in this case was that the clause also applied to gender. Between 1893 and 1917, 23 other states passed similar laws limiting the hours women could work in factories, laundries, mines, and other workplaces. But this case is the one that got the Supreme Court's attention. So what happened was that a woman named Muller, who owned and operated a laundry business in Portland, Oregon, employed a woman named Helen Watson. And if you've been listening to my videos for a while now, then you know that whenever a woman's name comes up, I have to share this insane fact about women. Did you know that when the word woman is pluralized, it becomes women? You're welcome. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, Kurt Muller, not that kind of woman. She employed a regular woman named Helen Watson and paid her time and a half if she worked over 10 hours a day. But one day, Helen Watson worked more than 10 hours and Muller didn't pay her the extra pay and therefore committed a crime against the state of Oregon because she violated the law. And so she was tried in court and convicted and she paid the fine. She appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. Okay, so what was the constitutional principle at stake in this case? Now let me remind you of the arguments that each side made in this case. Well, the question before the court was whether or not the state of Oregon had a legitimate reason to pass this kind of law. So now let's talk about why this case matters. Secondly, this case matters because the argument used by the state of Oregon was so radically new. However, the most interesting thing about this case is how it is viewed through the lens of second-wave feminism. Okay, I hope that helped.